Harvard professor Steven Pinker once famously said, "Music is nothing else than auditory cheesecake." His logic was brutal. Music doesn't cure cancer. It doesn't build bridges. It is just a dessert, a treat we allow ourselves only after the real work of survival is done. As a musician, I should be offended. By the researcher, I can see his point. If our definition of survival is merely eating and breathing, then no, we don't need music. I spent my first 20 years believing exactly that. I was born and grew up in a small city in China. And when I say small, I mean we only had 9 million people. I studied piano when I was 3, and guzheng, a Chinese harp, when I was 5. But where did my first real emotional to the music come from? It wasn't Beethoven. It wasn't Bach. It was a serious cat and a pesky mouse. My introduction to cat concerto come from watching Tom and Jerry. In a city of 9 million people, that cartoon was my safe space. Years later, I tried to conquer the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 myself. Technically, it was brutal test for finger technique. But emotionally, I was still that little girl cheering our mouse was just trying to get some sleep inside a grand piano. But outside that cartoon, I had no safe space. Because in my crowded classroom, music was always the first subject to be sacrificed. I remember when I waiting for the music lesson, only to see the math teacher come in instead. The system's logic was brutal. Maths helps you survive. English helps you compete. Music was for only after you'd already won. 7 years ago, I landed at the Newcastle airport, packing half of China in my suitcases and giant guzheng on my back. I didn't come here just to play. I realized that music is more than an art to be performed. It is a systematic discipline to be understood. This led me to my research, where I specialize in music psychology and music interventions for people with dementia. I learned that music is hardwired into our biology. Think about it. Before we speak, we sing. We call it motherese. It is that melodic intonation that a mother uses to smooth her baby. Evolutionary theory suggests that this musical communication was the original language of our species. It built a bond that kept the vulnerable infant alive. So, Professor Pinker, music is not an auditory cheesecake. It is cognitive scaffolding for human connection. However, when I discovered the scientific truth, I saw the real world closing in. Emma was one of my participants in my PhD study. Emma is a brilliant community musician. She has spent her life helping thousands of individuals to find light in their darkest moment. But Emma told me that when she was 16, she wanted to study art and music for her A-levels. Her parents were loving yet anxious. They wanted her to be safe. They told her, "No, Emma, you can't do 2 Mickey Mouse subjects." They wanted her to choose something sensible. Mickey Mouse subject. It implies that music is just a children's play, a joke, a cartoon. But Emma's parents didn't invent that phrase. They absorbed it from a culture that has been quietly devaluing music for decades. And now, their parental anxiety became a systemic reality. In the last 2 years, we have witnessed the strategic culling of the humanities. Oxford Brookes University closed its music department after 44 years. University of Kent announced the closure of all music courses. University of Nottingham suspended its music degrees. The list keeps growing. The justification is always financial, but we are telling our children, if you cannot measure it on a spreadsheet, it does not exist. But here is what the funding model fails to see. While we close this music department, our National Health Service and care homes are desperate for the non-drug interventions. They are begging for help that isn't coming. But here is the logic gap. You cannot have a clinical music therapist if you haven't firstly trained a musician. You cannot prescribe music as a medical tool if you don't understand the organics of the tool. When we shut down these music departments, we are cutting off the education pipeline for the very specialist our society demands. But perhaps you think we should only fund what makes money. Right, that's where the music makes its cases. In 2024, the UK music industry contributed 8 billion to the UK economy and hired 220,000 individuals. That is not a hobby, that is a powerhouse. When we shut down this music department, we are severing the very line to a 125 billion creative sector. So even to the Treasury's own code logic, the argument is over. We had already won. But for us, the real value of music is not found in the bank. It is found in the wiring of our brain. Music could be the back door to the brain while the front door is smashed. Think of the US Congresswoman, Gabrielle Giffords. In 2011, she survived an assassination attempt. The bullet destroyed her left brain. Surgeons saved her life, but they cannot give her back her voice. She had severe aphasia, the total loss of language. She could understand, but she cannot speak. Then her team tried the melodic intonation therapy. Why? While the bullet destroyed the language center in the left brain, the networks for the pitch and rhythm were still intact. She didn't speak her way back. She sang her way back. Music was the only bridge that bypassed the damage. But listen, that bridge didn't build itself. It was engineered by a therapist who understands the neurology of the rhythm. If we lose the expertise today, we'll limit the recovery tomorrow. I have seen the same bridge open in my work as trustee for the charity Chinese Wellbeing in Liverpool. These are men and women now in their late 70s and 80s. They work the long hours to build a life for their families. To the outside world, they might seem invisible, or even worse, a cost on a spreadsheet. But we have an evergreen choir. I've seen them. Even on the days of freezing wind and pouring rain, making their way to get to the rehearsals. Why does this matter to you? Because one day this will be your story. This will be your parents. This is a non-drug interventions that NHS is prescribing for. When they sing in their first language, they are not just performing. They are accessing the deep neurological pathways that language alone cannot reach. So when they stand on the stage, there's dignity, there's pride, and they are titans. Music turns them from invisible to a creators of arts. It is not a hobby, it is oxygen. But the most powerful lesson didn't come from my data. It came from watching dementia, still my warrior. My grandmother survived breast cancer and nursed my grandfather through his final illness. She was a woman who raised a family through decades of history, from 1930s China to a modern day. She was fearless. And then came the shrinking, the fading, dementia. For 10 years, my mother cared for her, and I saw my strong mother gradually became a frightened orphan, grieving for a parent who was still sitting right there. It is called anticipatory grief, mourning someone while they are still alive. Before I moved to the UK, I witnessed the fate. There was one day she had stopped speaking. Her eyes were vacant. She was drifting in a fog. We felt we had already said goodbye. But one day, we played a song. A patriotic song from her youth, in the 1950s. And then, she was back. Blimey, she didn't just hum, she sang every single word. For those 3 minutes, she wasn't a patient, she was my grandmother. Those moments wasn't magic, it was science. It worked because I understand the language of music. But where do we learn that structure of the music? Universities. So this is the madness of our current situation. We are burning down the laboratories while the hospitals next door is begging for relief. So, was Steven Pinker right? Is music just auditory cheesecake? If you measure a human being only by their economic output, then yes, music is useless. But I don't believe that's what a human is. My research and my grandmother taught me that a human is a creator of connections, of memories, and of dignity. So, do we need music to survive biologically? Maybe not. But to remain fully human? Yes. I have a seat in the UK Online Centre in Liverpool. On the back of that chair, I had these words engraved. Music heals, transforms, binds. We are not keeping music alive to learn how to make money. We are keeping music alive so that one day, when the time comes, when language fails, when memory fades, when connections feels impossible, music can help us remember who we are. And that moment is already here. Thank you.